So I've been testing dog GPS fences for years with our guardian dog Roman, and here's our review of the top 3 GPS fences on the market today. Now there seems to be some confusion on GPS fences and GPS trackers and why GPS trackers are so much more affordable than GPS fences. GPS trackers like Tractive and FiDog track your dog's location and show health data like number of steps and sleep quality. So these are great to have if your dog does run away from home, and they can help you notice potential health issues quickly if there's a change in their normal activity level. These are usually $100 to $200 and require a subscription. And a lot of people will say, why not just use an AirTag? The key difference is that an AirTag isn't actually tracking your dog on its own. It uses Bluetooth and depends on nearby Apple devices to pick up its signal and update its location. So if your dog runs off somewhere without other iPhones around, you may never get an update. GPS fences, on the other hand, cost between $400 and $1,000. So why the huge price difference? GPS dog fences also track your dog's location, but they're also for containment. You draw a boundary on a map, send it to the collar, and it creates its own virtual fence. Typically, your dog will receive 1 or 2 warnings when approaching the boundary, and either vibrate or a static correction, based on your settings and training preferences when crossing the boundary. If they do cross the boundary, that's when GPS tracking is turned on automatically and you receive an alert to your phone. You can think of a GPS dog fence as an actual fence. By teaching your dog what the audible cues mean and reinforcing those boundaries around real-life distractions, they learn exactly where they're supposed to stay. So if you just want to track activity and health trends and have some peace of mind if your dog happens to wander off, then you probably just need a GPS tracker. If you think you need a GPS fence, here's a few things to keep in mind. Typically, you need at least about a half an acre for it to work properly. Battery life is typically about 1 to 3 days. The GPS fences currently on the market are very different. 3 of the more popular GPS fences are PetSafe, Halo, and SpotOn. We'll start with the PetSafe Guardian GPS 2.0 dog fence plus tracking collar. PetSafe is one of the more affordable collars at $399.99. A monthly subscription is required and costs about $10 a month. Setup was super fast and easy. It really was as simple as just logging in, drawing a fence, and sending it to the collar. There aren't a million settings or features to sort through, so if you just want a basic GPS fence without a complicated app, this one is very straightforward. I didn't see any training content within the app, but they do have an easy-to-follow training guide on their website. I do wish more training was directly built into the app because training is a big part of making any GPS fence work. So the collar is a good basic GPS fence and a simple collar overall compared to the others. The strap, I think, is kind of flimsy, and I feel like it would break easily, especially for a rougher dog or a dog that spends a lot of time running through brush. At the same time, it's lightweight, which is one of the things that actually makes it appealing. It's probably the most realistic option of the 3 for smaller dogs. It does work really well in open areas, but not where there's a lot of metal interference or dense trees. So I think of this as more of an open yard GPS fence and not necessarily the collar I'd choose for woods, hills, heavy tree coverage, or a more complicated property. If you have a large open yard and a smaller dog, this could be a good collar. But if your property has a lot of tree coverage or you need the most consistent boundary possible, you probably want to look into the other options. So next is the Halo Collar 5, and I would say this is a nice step up from the PetSafe collar. This collar costs $5.99 and the ongoing subscription is about $10 a month as well. So right off the bat, there's a lot going on in the app. So there were a few things that took me a while to find, but for the most part, it's mostly easy to follow. It's very training focused, which is especially nice for those new to GPS fences. There's a Learn tab with a series of lessons to help you better understand the collar. And Halo puts a lot of emphasis on training your dog to understand the warnings instead of just relying on the correction. That part is important because with any GPS fence, the collar is only one piece of it. The dog still needs to understand what the sounds and vibrations actually mean. One thing I really liked about their fence setup is when I put in my address, it automatically pulled in my boundary markers and marked our creek out. It wasn't exactly precise, so you still need to make sure and edit the points, but it did make setup a lot faster. This collar feels a bit more sturdy than the PetSafe design, and they have some fun sleeve colors. Their website says it fits most dogs, but the design is focused more towards larger dogs for sure. The main strap still feels a little flimsy to me, and I would worry about it cutting easily. One thing that stands out about Halo is how customizable the feedback settings are. You can edit the vibration pattern and warning sounds in the settings, which is nice because different dogs respond better to different cues. That being said, it does seem to pulse the warnings and corrections, so it may vibrate, pause for several seconds, and then vibrate again if they haven't returned. Ideally, your dog should already understand where the boundary is and how to return back to safety, but I could see the longer pauses being a little confusing for some dogs during the learning phase. Next, we have SpotOn, and personally, I think this is the best GPS fence they have on the market today. This collar is priced at $9.99, which is obviously the most expensive of the three. This collar is different from the others in that the fence will work without a subscription. With the $9.95 monthly subscription though, you get immediate notifications when your dog crosses a boundary and live tracking to see their exact location. So I really like the way their app is set up. It's easy to switch between dogs, create fences, and track your dog's exact location. They also offer a series of training lessons you can click through as well. I would say this is the top of the line when it comes to GPS fences. Overall, the collar just has a way more solid feel and can handle a lot. You can see the difference between this strap and the straps of PetSafe and Halo. And if it does happen to break, these collar sections can easily be replaced. It is very large and heavy, so it's definitely more for medium to large dogs. The thing I like most about this collar is how reliable and consistent the boundary feels. SpotOn uses a stronger GPS setup, which helps the collar get a clearer read on where the dog actually is. That's a big deal because GPS fences naturally have some drift, but this one seems to have the least amount of shifting and the most predictable boundary line. I like that the warning tones and corrections also felt really solid and consistent, so even if your dog is already trained to a boundary, it helps reinforce exactly where that line is. Another standout about this collar is it's designed to work in more challenging environments, like dense tree coverage or more remote areas. That's important because a lot of people looking at GPS fences aren't using them in a perfectly open, flat backyard. You may have woods, hills, acreage, and weird shaped property lines. SpotOn also gives you a lot of flexibility with how you create fences, whether you want to walk the boundary or create it in the app. So it feels more practical for real life properties instead of just simple open spaces. One of the biggest challenges with any GPS dog fence is something called GPS drift. GPS drift happens when the collar's reported location shifts slightly from its actual location. This can be caused by things like tree cover, buildings, terrain, or anything that interferes with the GPS signal. I wanted to evaluate three things: how accurately the fence line was maintained, whether the warning tones were delivered consistently to give dogs a fair warning before reaching the boundary, and whether the fence alerts activated every time they were supposed to. I tested the collars in 2 different environments. First, I tested them in an open area. This is where GPS fences typically perform their best because the collar has a clear view of the sky and fewer obstacles blocking the GPS signal. Then I put the collars through a more challenging real-world test in a densely wooded area. Trees, terrain, and other obstacles can interfere with the GPS signals, making it harder for the system to maintain a consistent fence line. This is where issues like missed alerts, delayed warnings, gaps in the fence, and inconsistent boundary performance are most likely to appear. By testing both environments, we can see not only how these systems perform under ideal conditions, but also how they hold up in the situations many dog owners encounter every day. So I did a test to see the consistency of the boundary line. I drew the boundaries the same on each app and marked where I received the boundary alert. PetSafe actually really surprised me in how consistent it was. The boundary line stayed the same with each test. Being one of the cheaper options, I didn't really expect it to perform this well. I was pretty surprised to find that there was not much consistency in the boundary for Halo. I would get the alert 5 to 10 feet away from the actual boundary each time. I repeated this test a few days later and it was the same, and I think this would be really confusing for a dog. I knew SpotOn would probably be the best here because I've used the collar for years and I've seen minimal drift. They have access to over 150 satellites and connect to 25 to 35 at any given time. So next I did the same test out in the woods where we have no cell signal or Wi-Fi and the tree coverage is really thick. So for this test, I walked to the boundary I marked on the map and I set the flag where I received the correction. So I ignore the warning tones and I place it where I actually received the correction. That's another warning tone. So I would place it right here. So I started with PetSafe and overall it did okay. There was definitely a delay getting the correction to the collar, but the corrections were all within about 5 feet of each other. And then there's also a delay getting it to stop correcting when I walk back. Next I tested Halo, and when it did work, the corrections were within about 10 to 15 feet of each other. However, there were several times I never got any correction at all, which could be a big problem since this is a collar for containment. So one thing I don't like about this collar is it pulses the corrections. So it pulses, stops, and that could be really confusing to a dog because if they go past the boundary, if it stops, they might think they're good, but really they're still past the boundary and it'll still pulse the correction at them. Last I tested SpotOn and it did awesome. The corrections were the same every pass through, so this is exactly what you'd want to see in a GPS fence collar. Looking at the results, the open sky test wasn't very surprising. When GPS conditions are ideal and the collar has a clear view of the sky, all of the systems performed reasonably well. If you live in a wide open area with little tree cover or terrain interference, you'll likely have more GPS fence options to choose from. The real difference showed up when we moved into the woods. PetSafe struggled with delayed corrections and corrections that didn't turn off quickly enough, creating an experience that wasn't always fair or predictable for the dog. Halo's fence line varied significantly, and in some locations the fence didn't deploy at all. That's important because if a fence doesn't activate when it's supposed to, that's effectively a gap in your fence. Think of it like a hole in a physical fence. Your dog has no boundary there because the fence simply isn't working. SpotOn was the most consistent throughout the wooded test. The warning tones, alerts, and fence line deployed reliably, even in more challenging GPS conditions. That consistency matters because dogs learn through repetition. When the boundary stays in the same place and the warnings happen every time, dogs can clearly understand where the fence line is and make the right decision before reaching it. At the end of the day, the best GPS fence isn't just the one that works when conditions are perfect, it's the one you can rely on when conditions aren't. So overall, these are all pretty nice collars, and the one that's right for you just depends on your specific needs.